after after the event is over.
Thanks for coming to today's Open Data Week 2021 workshop.
Quick piece of information.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that for everyone, Martha. Guys, today. So today we'll take you through an overview of our office and public benefits navigation work. We'll jump into a brief introduction to one of our public-facing websites, as well as the open data resources we've built around it. We're going to have some time for a brainstorming activity, and we'll have some prizes. And then we'll finish off with some Q&A. To introduce ourselves, we're coming from the NYC Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity. I'm Sanghia. I'm a product and program manager here with the team.
Hi, my name's Devin Hirth. I'm a product designer here at NYC Opportunity.
And I'm Jack. I'm a product fellow here.
To set the stage, and these are facts and figures from before the pandemic. New York City has roughly 8.6 million residents. Roughly 19% of New Yorkers live in poverty. 43.1% of New Yorkers live in near poverty. So that means a total of the population, a total of at least 62% of the population of New Yorkers lives in near poverty. And this information is coming out of our office's poverty measure, which is based on New York City specific poverty thresholds to really take into account the difference of the cost of living in a place like New York City. Safety net benefits play an important role in keeping families above the poverty threshold. This is also based on some analysis coming from our office. From a pre-pandemic report, our office puts out a New York City government poverty measure. You can see here on this chart, we've got, on the left, we've got benefit elements that have been shown to lower the poverty rate. And this includes benefit elements like housing adjustments that can include tenant-based subsidies, housing choice vouchers, rent freeze, Social Security income, nutritional assistance programs like SNAP and WIC, income credits like EITC and Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. And to the right, our office has identified different costs that raise the poverty rate in New York City. And this includes costs like childcare costs, the cost of commuting, payroll taxes, and medical expenses. Poverty research and public benefits intersects a lot with our office's work. We're part of the Mayor's Office of Operations, and we're a team of about 80 folks. The origins of our office go back about 15 years ago to 2006 with the Center for Economic Opportunities Anti-Poverty Research Work and Policy Work, and a separate unit, the Health and Human Services Connects Works, to use data and technology to break down silos around data and a holistic approach to health and human services. Over the past 15 years, as our office has evolved, we've brought together different skills in program management, service design, evaluation, and development. And we've got a team of product developers that have been around for about 5 years, and we manage a number of different public-facing websites, including Access NYC, Growing Up NYC, Generation NYC, Working NYC, and now Equity NYC, as well as we do work on some internal tools and proof of concepts. We believe that government products should be built with the people who use them and the people who maintain them so that they address real resident needs and are sustainable, that they should be accessible and respectful, accessible for the people who need to use them, and respectful of their time and dignity, that they should be delivered and tested sooner than later, with a focus on learning and adjusting and improving over extensive planning and building, and that they should be open rather than closed, where possible, leveraging interoperable, open source, and cost-efficient technologies, and documenting and sharing that work for others to build upon and use. We also believe that there are no wrong doors to public benefits, that regardless of how or where residents are navigating public benefits, whether it's through the government themselves, through caseworkers, through nonprofit community-based organizations, that they have the information to make informed choices. And again, because open interoperable solutions be closed. Through our office's work, we've established a working model for maintaining public benefits information and screening calculations, and are continuing to maintain and update this so others don't have to. And as new benefits emerge, we're going to continue to adding them to our resources. But to take a step back and talk a little bit about how we got here today, we'll start with Access NYC. Access NYC is often, but not to be confused with Access HRA, which is managed by HRA. A brief bit of history. Access NYC was originally developed around 2005. In 2016, our two teams identified an opportunity to split citywide information and screening into the current redesigned version of Access NYC, which debuted in about 4 years ago in March of 2017. The original version of Access NYC evolved into what is now Access HRA. And so TLDR Access NYC focuses on multi-agency citywide benefits information, discovery, screening, and ways to take next steps, which then link out to different applications or resources managed by different city agencies. And Access HRA, managed by HRA, provides electronic services around the actual applications, services, and recertification for HRA public assistance programs like SNAP and cash assistance. Access NYC is simply a front door for all of this information. The website is mobile responsive. It's designed to work well on phones and tablets. And the website is intended for everyone. Benefits navigators who may be connecting clients or family members to services, as well as benefit seekers who may be the clients or New York City residents themselves. There's no login requirement, and all information on the site is open, so you don't have to create a registration or be kept from any of the resources that are on Access NYC. We'll take a deeper dive into some of these features in a moment, but it's got 3 key features, which include a questionnaire that can help you determine potential eligibility for programs, program guides, which provide comprehensive information written in plain language about criteria and how to apply, as well as a map that hosts local community-based organizations and government offices. We put a high priority on plain language on our products, and Access NYC is written in plain language. We try to minimize any sort of legalese or government jargon. And here you can just see some sort of examples of how we think about framing and prioritizing information from the perspective of an individual resident who's trying to learn more and take a next step towards receiving assistance. Very briefly, I'm just going to take you through a short demo of the Access NYC screener. If you've got a phone handy and you're watching this session on your computer, you can simply go to access.nyc.gov and click the Am I Eligible button to follow along. I'm just going to open a new tab and go onto the site. So I won't explain everything that's going on, but in general, there are a series of questions that folks can answer. What kind of help am I looking for? Let's say I'm looking for cash and expenses, help with food and housing. Continue on. I'll have a disclaimer. I'll agree to the disclaimer. And then the only 2 questions that are required on Access NYC are age and zip code. And moving along through the process, we'll be prompted for more questions about ourselves. And at this point, all these questions are optional, but the more information that I'm able to provide or I decide to provide, the more information that the screener is able to use to be able to determine what benefits I might potentially be eligible for. So let's say I don't have an income. Let's say I have expenses. Let's say I have rent. Let's say that's monthly. And just to move forward the process, I won't add any more. Let's say I'm living with 2 folks. Say I'm the head of the household. I'll say I'm living with a child. And then just to go through the process, I'll prefer to not provide any more information other than that I have $100 in cash in hand. So at this point, we can recap all of the information that we're providing through the Access NYC screener. And in a moment, we'll be taken to the results page. So at this point, we'll see a list of programs that are in Access NYC that, based on the information that I provided, that I'm potentially eligible for. So at this point, I can reference these results later by texting myself a link to this URL or emailing myself a link to this URL. And I can also take a deeper dive into the application process and learning more about these programs. So based on the information that I did provide, I can see that, that my household would be potentially eligible for these programs, which include fair fares, cooling assistance, which are cash-related programs, SNAP, which is a food-related program, public housing, HEAP, pre-tax prep, and then additionally, some other programs that Access NYC has determined I might be eligible for. Next, I'm going to take you through a very brief demo of the program guides on Access NYC. And if you want to, you can go to Access NYC, and I'm actually just going to paste this into the chat so you can link to it directly. Just give me a moment. So I'm sharing a sample program guide. This is the typical format of how we try to break down and simplify complex information to try to make it digestible and actionable for visitors of the site. We typically break down information around a government benefit or social service into about 5 buckets. So on the left, we summarize, we're in the section of how it works, We have a section for determine your eligibility. We have a section for what you need to include, which includes required documentation. And then we break down steps for how you can apply for the specific program. Additionally, if you go further down, we have more information around ways to get help. So for example, is there a hotline that's available? Is there an email address that you can reach out to for assistance? Can you call 311 and ask for assistance through 311 services? Can you learn a little bit more in detail? And so we link to the actual formal cash assistance website that is managed by HRA. Additionally, immigrants can make an appointment with Action NYC to potentially receive assistance, given some of the confusion and former complexities around public charge. So just going through this very briefly, we really try to simplify information. Here, we'll just get a quick summary of how does cash assistance work. What does it entail? It will require proof of identity and citizenship status. People have to be a US citizen or have satisfactory immigration status to receive cash assistance. There's some other requirements. If you're able to work, you will need to be working. Moving on to the next section, we break down some of the questions around eligibility and the factors that affect eligibility. So this program, cash assistance, will look at income. It will look at money received from other potential benefits that my household may be on. The number of people living in the house and other resources will be considered. And then moving on to what you need to include, these are the different types of documents that are required as part of the application process. So proof of who you are is going to be required. What does that mean? In this case, it means potentially one of these types of forms of identity documents. Proof of where you live. What does that mean? It can entail like one of these types of statements, like statements from our landlord or lease or mortgage records. Proof of income. What does that mean? What are those types of documentation, etc. So moving on to the next section, how to apply. What are my options for taking the next step to apply for cash assistance? Okay, there's an online application. I can visit these sites and use these tools to apply or recertify online. Optionally, I can apply by mail and I can download a PDF form. Applying in person, these are the details around in-person HRA applications. And then at the bottom, we've got a link to let you text or email yourself a link to this page. So all of that said, to date on Access NYC, we host information for over 55 different program guides. Here is one half of the currently listed program guides on Access NYC. Not every program is included in the screener. So here you can see that bolded programs like 3K for All, We Speak NYC, Emergency Food Assistance. We don't currently include them in the screening process. They don't have any sorts of tests to receive assistance, but they are more population specific programs so that if you're actually interested in engaging these services, you can. And we're working on ways to integrate them into the screening process on the site. But this is just a quick inventory of what we capture on Access NYC and what we currently enable screening for. So these are some additional programs as well. So all the information for Access NYC and our other websites go through a review process with partners from over 17 different governmental agencies. This ranges from the federal level to the state level to city agencies. We use Gather Content, which is an editorial workflow tool to populate, to draft public information with our liaisons. Once this is approved, we pull them into our sites like Access NYC and Growing Up NYC and Generation NYC. We also localize this information, translating it into 10 additional languages. And the public information that is represented in the program guide that I showed you. All that information is available through a resource hosted through NYC Open Data, the benefits and programs dataset, which I'll take a deeper dive into in a moment. And then all the calculations for screening, the eligibility criteria that powers that up to 10-step screening process that I showed you before. We make that available as an API, which we'll explain a little bit more in detail in a few moments. So that really brings us to the NYC Benefits Platform. We've got these two resources, and our goal is to really support organizations that are doing similar work that can make it easier for New York City residents to discover and be aware of multiple benefits that they might be eligible for through these two different resources. So I'm going to focus on the benefits and programs data set first. It has information for over 80 programs. This includes all the program guides that are on Access NYC, as well as program guides that may be on other sites like Growing Up NYC and Generation NYC. We update this formally on a biannual basis with all of our liaisons and as needed on a seasonal basis, given that there are different programs that may be only available, say, for the summer or for the winter. Let's dive into the data set. So what I'm going to do is, jumping ahead, there's a scavenger hunt. Spoiler alert. Whoops. I'm just going to paste this link into the chat. So if you'd like to follow along, you can. And please give me a moment to find the chat. Right. So if you click through this link, you'll be taken to the resource page hosted on NYC Open Data. Here, you can learn a little bit more about it. You can see the sites that we manage that are using some of this data. If you go further down the page, we've got a data dictionary, which just shows you in great detail what types of data are included in this data set. We can view the data, we can export it, and if you have a developer token set up through NYC Open Data, you can interact with this data set programmatically. But let's actually just view the data. If we click the View Data button, we'll see a bunch of different columns. And to make this a little bit more manageable, I'm just going to search for cash assistance. So I still get a bunch of results, but we can see, if I go down further down the page, this row that says cash assistance, at the top, the program name. So I just briefly showed you the program guide for the Access NYC cash assistance program. We've got a lot of different details in these different columns. We have an ID number that's specific to the specific program. All of this information is available in English. We do have all this information localized, but it's not yet available in other languages on the NYC Open Data portal. So as we go through, we'll see additional information. So page type, this is a benefit. Program category, this is in the category of cash and expenses. The government agency that administers and delivers on this program is NYC HRA, and so forth. As we go further along, we'll start to see more information. For example, the program description, there's quite a bit of text here. So if you roll over, you'll be able to see more of the copy that's associated with the program description. If we go into heads up, this is totally not legible on my small screen, barely legible for myself, but you can see how this specific information exists on the Access NYC program guide and how it maps to different sections. We've basically made that information and more available into these sorts of discrete columns that aim to just segment the different types of information that we're collecting and updating for the information that's on Access NYC. So this includes everything from steps to how to apply or enroll online. We go further, there's a separate field for the actual URL of the online application for the cash assistance program. Go further along, we'll see more information. We'll see a summary of the required documents. I mentioned that on Access NYC, there's different ways to get help that we point out in the more ways to get help section, and then we capture that in this column for the get help summary. So you can see that information around the HRA info line being here and what to say when calling 311 and so forth. So next, it's time for a scavenger hunt. We've got 3 quiz questions. So the way this is going to work is I will share these questions one by one, and in order to answer the questions, you're going to have to go to the NYC Open Dataset and search, do a little bit of digging to figure out what is the answer. And so to sweeten the deal here and to have folks play with this data set, the first person to answer each of the questions correctly will win a prize. So to get started, again, you'll have to go to that Open Dataset link that I sent you. And moving on to the next slide. First question is, when are applications open for pre-K for all? So as soon as you know the answer or think you know the answer, just chime in on the set. Chime in on the chat. The pressure's on. I wish I had thought of an appropriate soundtrack to play right now. The answer, one answer is February 24th, and February 24th is correct. So Neum BH Scullion, you win. You're the winner for the first question. And what we'll do when we end up following up to today's session is we'll collect email addresses, and make sure that at some point in the future, when our office reopens in downtown Brooklyn and everything is more safe, we can coordinate some sort of pickup for a prize. So let me just take, okay, great. And it looks like Gregorio Morales is adding some supplementary information. There is a deadline coming up. So thank you for that clarification. All right, moving on to the next question. In what ways can you start the pre-K for all application process? Remember when we were going through how the cash assistance program was formatted, we did have a section around ways to apply, and this may be broken out into, one section of the data set and probably multiple columns. And it's definitely possible to figure out the answer without going into the data set. I think I saw a hand raised. Feel free to type your question into the chat. All right, Alfred Eng was the first to chime in with online with My Schools. That's correct. Mariana Gomez says you can call 718 or use the My Schools website to locate a school near you, ? All right, Kate Newman says families can apply online or over the phone. So the answer is you can start the pre-K for all application process online. That's correct. You can also start it through the phone, all this information is in the heads up column and also broken out into the separate columns for how to apply by phone and how to apply online. So while Alfred was the first to reply, it looks like Mariana says you can use the website or you can call the 718, which is the fully correct, accurate answer. But for participating, I'm just going to say that Alfred, Mariana, and Kate, we'll all set you up with the prize from today's scavenger hunt. All right. Moving on to the final quiz question for the scavenger hunt. What is the website to apply for pre-K for all? So some folks have already provided that information. So I think that's already been answered. You're just too good at this game. So with the benefits and programs data set, we imagine this could be a potentially useful resource for anyone else, any other organization who is interested in trying to solve the problem of maintaining and updating information related to public benefits. Next, I'm going to hand it off to Devin, who's going to take a deeper dive into the screening API.
Great, thanks, Song. So yeah, the NYC Benefits Screening API is basically the second component of the NYC Benefits Platform that we're discussing. And it is the public endpoint for the rules engine that governs screening eligibility for the 35+ city, state, and federal programs. Many of the programs that Song went over in a previous slide, including SNAP, Cash Assistance, WIC, even more. So if Access NYC is the front door to New York City benefits and programs information, the API could definitely be considered the back door. Although it is publicly accessible, it's just catered towards technology platforms instead of everyday New Yorkers. So some of the aspects of the API are that it is REST or representable state transfer based. It leverages all of the benefits of modern API development, including accessibility, performance, maintenance, etc. It's very simple. It only requires token-based authentication to use and has two eligibility screening endpoints for single and bulk requests. And we've also paired it with a very detailed usage guide that was available in the link that we previously shown. It's privacy friendly. The data required and accepted meets our organization's standard for anonymization. So what kind of data gets sent to the API? Some of this we went over with the Access NYC screener, but it's household attributes that include total household cash and living situations, such as renting home ownership or living in a shelter, and individual person attributes, such as age, education, employment, disability, status, veteran status, and Medicaid status, as well as itemized income and expenses. We refer to the request data as household composition data. So this data is sent to the API in a request, and it is run through a screening calculator built on Amazon Web Services and the Drools business management system to return a list of programs and titles that can be used to reference programs in the NYC Benefits and Programs dataset. So, as Song mentioned and went over on the previous slide, these programs fall under one of the following categories, including direct cash payments, childcare, education, enrichment, family services, food, health, housing, people with disabilities, and employment. So the API is comprised of 5 total endpoints, including an authentication. And it's very simple because it all fits on one slide. There's a set of authentication endpoints that are required for user password management and getting an authentication token for requests to the eligibility screening endpoints. And as I mentioned, there are 2 of these, one for a single household request, which is what the Access NYC screening tool uses, and another for bulk data evaluation that accepts and returns a comma separated value file or CSV file with multiple household requests. So the single household screening endpoint, a user passes a single household composition data object. So I can forward to the next slide. Thanks. Object, excuse me. You pass a single household composition data object in JavaScript object notation format or JSON object format. Apologies for having to break this up onto 2 columns, but it didn't quite fit into the entire slide. But you can see here that there is one household data object with the cash and living situation attributes, as well as a person array with a single person object. Note the age, household member type, and other attributes, including employment and income. This example only has one person, though multiple persons may be added to the array to represent each member of the household. The response is another JSON object with a list of potentially eligible program names and codes representing the benefits that the household may be eligible for. And these program codes map directly to the codes in the NYC Benefits and Programs dataset. So with the bulk household screening endpoint, users can send a comma separated value file, as I mentioned, or CSV file. And each row contains a household composition data object formatted in columns as opposed to JSON. And the response is another CSV that lists all of the eligible benefits each household may be eligible for.
I'm just going to chime in to add to what Devin's saying right here. We're not showing the website right now, but there essentially is a way for you to use the API through these CSVs without the need for any development, so to speak. So we've got a sample CSV, and if you modify that sample CSV with the household composition details that Devin has mentioned, you can simply upload it and then download another CSV that does have these potentially eligible programs, as Devin just mentioned.
Yep. So that tool is available in the documentation at NYC Screen API. There's also a 7-step guide that will help onboard new users to the API. And we applied our principles of using plain language to make sure that our guide is easy to read for developers and non-developers alike. And we think this is a great companion to the Swagger Endpoint Explorer that is more geared towards development. Then there are a few extras, one of which that Song mentioned is the bulk submission tool that allows you to upload a CSV directly to the site and get a CSV back. It requires an account, of course. And another tool is a request builder that will help you build a household composition data JSON object to send to the single endpoint or the single eligibility endpoint. And then there's also a form to help you manage your password. The documentation itself is open source, so you can inspect the nuts and bolts of all of these form tools. And we have a couple other sample code and data collections, one being the Postman collection that can be used to test requests to the API locally if you're familiar with Postman, a sample bulk submission endpoint CSV that can be used as a template for the bulk submission endpoint, and also a sample JavaScript application. So if you're writing an application, you can explore this as well. So from here, you can go to the documentation to get started. It's bit.ly/NYC-screening-API, request an account, browse the documentation, try the tools and inspect the code, and definitely give us feedback. We're absolutely looking for feedback on this tool and any of these tools, and ask for support as well. The email here is also included on the documentation site. You don't have to save it. Great, thanks. So I'll pass it to Jack.
Great, thanks, Devin. So in the past hour or so, you've been introduced to the New York City Benefits Platform, which I'll remind all of us is composed of the Screening API and the Dataset. And the Dataset is basically all the information that we have on our program guides, on Access NYC, and several other products that our office has, as well as the Screening API, which is the set of calculations for around 35 plus programs or benefits, such as cash assistance or so forth. And we created these tools because we think it might be useful for several use cases. One is of which the creation of new custom screening tools. So for example, if you're a nonprofit working in the food sector, you might want to create screening tools for food specific programs or benefits that you might be able to help your clients find food-related benefits, for example. A second use case is, let's say you have a set of client data, or you work for an agency where you have access to client data, where you might be able to pass this client data onto the Screening API to pre-screen your clients for their potential eligibility for programs. So these are just two use cases that we've thought of so far, but we're always open to more ideas, which is why, next slide, which is why we like to give you an opportunity to, I think you jumped ahead. Oh, no, this is right. Yeah, so which is why we'd like to give you an opportunity to meet others in this meetup and kind of brainstorm your ideas on how you might be able to use the dataset or API. We'll break you out into breakout rooms. Yeah, I think we've lost quite a few people, but thank you all for those that stayed. We would really like to hear, or give you a chance to talk about what you talked about in your rooms. So how about we just start with breakout room 1, and if there was anyone who wanted to share.
I can chat. Alfred and I were in the same group. 2 ideas that we talked about. One, which came from Alfred, was that it would be a cool idea if the Screening API can be integrated with the 3-in-1 mobile app. So that it's sort of like a one-stop shop for people who are using that. Right now, they have a lot of static hyperlinks in place, so that if you're looking at like a program or any piece of information on the site, they'll sort of like link you out to like, I guess, like a city site or something like that, so you can go and find out if you're eligible or more information about it. But it would be cool if there was some way that like a client would be able to sort of like just a user would be able to potentially screen just directly in the app or something like that. Another idea that we talked about was for any sort of nonprofits or like tech for good agencies out there or organizations who are doing similar work to us, but are struggling with keeping content up to date because they can't find a city contact, or it's just like too much work on them, that they would be able to leverage the benefits and programs data set so that they can have up-to-date content, hopefully save them some time on doing a lot of that editorial work and a little bit more time on the ground with their clients. Hopefully save them some money too.
Yes, certainly. We've put together these resources so that we don't want people to repeat what has already been done. So yeah, thank you for sharing. How about breakout room 2? I see Kate and Devin are writing some things.
Yeah, so we, I guess, chatted a lot about just the larger system of being able to have like resources available, these up-to-date contacts for nonprofits in a way that's, I don't know, able to be managed and kept up to date, and really how important that is and how many barriers there are. I'll say that we spoke in a little more detail about ACS, the Child Welfare Agency in New York, because that's where I live. So talking through those things and seeing that there's a lot of programs offered through ACS that are not on that that data set. So also thinking how to incorporate that and make sure those stay up to date.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. And if you don't mind, we would like to reach out at some point, maybe to talk about what those programs or missing programs might be. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, it turns out that we only had 2 breakout rooms. So I think Song, I will pass it back to you.
Great. Yeah, we were sort of in a de facto breakout room here, and one idea, a couple ideas that came up from Mariana. Is it Mariana?
It's Mariana.
Mariana?
Yeah, you can say it with the D if you can't pronounce, like roll the R. Mariana. It's the hack.
excuse me. Some great ideas that came up were introducing these resources to universities, to educational programs where students are working to apply their design and technology skills, but potentially doing research and looking for problems to solve. And these might be resources that can be applied towards prototyping and developing new tools that we know are solving problems that do exist and are very tangible in New York. So thank you for sharing. To move on and to wrap up, we believe there's no wrong doors to public benefits. Again, we're building and maintaining, expanding these resources, the data set and the API, especially as there's a new federal administration and different types of aid are being delivered and being represented into maybe expanded programs and new types of programs around all of the pressing challenges of recovery. We'll be working with different levels of government to expand what we have in these resources as well as on our public facing sites. And we see that, if anyone's dealing with these types of challenges in different ways, we hope that this can help save time, given that we're doing all of this work to provide some sort of system of truth around plain language information and screening. So in terms of what's next, as mentioned, we'll be adding additional program guides and resources. At some point, we'll be considering refactoring the screening infrastructure that we have so far, making the code for screening itself open source in a developer accessible format. I'll be following up to all the attendees today with these slides, collecting information for a rain check on the scavenger hunt prizes, and happy to answer any questions and have more conversations as follow-up. Moving on, two pieces in the documentation that we didn't really cover that kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what we've built that might be helpful. We do have human readable versions of the screening calculations. And by human readable, I mean we have something like a 50-page PDF of the scenarios and conditions that we've then implemented into the API itself, which is using Drools, that open source rules engine. So this does exist today. And then separately, another key piece of documentation for the screening API, we have the benefit screening chart. So with Access NYC, we are screening for something like over 35 programs and up to 10 questions through the sort of branching pathway. But what we've done is we've broken that out into the specific program and then the specific questions or parameters or types of data that would be needed to screen for that program. So for example, this is probably really small, but to screen for just cash assistance, according to this chart, it really looks at income. It doesn't look at expenses or unemployment status. It looks at your household size. It looks at relationship amongst the folks in the house, student status, and pregnancy. And so if someone wanted to say build a screen tool or screen specifically for cash assistance, only these columns or parameters of inputs would be needed. Again, Access NYC focuses on a broader comprehensive screening, given our scope trying to bring awareness to a wide variety of benefits. But for these resources, there's so much opportunity to be much more focused and deliberate. If that makes sense. We've got these resources here. We also manage an Access NYC newsletter where we provide updates around breaking new expanded social services and benefits. Here's our contact info. We've got a Q&A section. Before we get into the Q&A, one shout out I'd like to give is to a session happening tomorrow as part of Open Data Week for Equity NYC, and a lot of the work and thinking around that website, which our office has just launched to surface and make more transparent different metrics related to equity across different New York City services. At this point, let's see, it's 11:40, so we're on time. So we've got plenty of time for conversation or any sorts of questions or additional ideas that might have come up we didn't get a chance to talk about. So I think we have a small session here, so feel free to just unmute yourself.
Hey, Song, there was a question in the chat earlier by Devin. He asks, is there a program or process for bringing more services into the API? Maybe government-funded services and not just government services.
That is a good question. We definitely have a process for bringing government-funded services into the API. we don't currently have a process for bringing non-government funded services into the API or dataset at the moment. But if there's interest in doing that, we're happy to, have a conversation around what that might entail, if there's any sort of specific ideas. But just based on our current scope, we are prioritizing government services and benefits.
Is there like a, hi, thanks. Is there like a rate of, is there like what rate are you bringing on government services? And like, how does that outreach work?
So
like, what's the maximum you think you'll get done, but by the time the next administration comes in?
Okay, so the next administration is coming in, let's see, like January. I'm just going to say for, I guess, like this quarter, or like by, like, let's say the summer, it's about 3.5 months from now. From our internal roadmap, at least in terms of content and government services, we're definitely paying attention very closely to anything that has a arguably broad lens on poverty and equity, but more specifically, we're following the federal legislation. How does that translate into updates for existing programs? Is there going to be like new rent freeze or like rent relief programs that somehow flow from the federal level to the state level? There supposedly already is funding at the state level for rent relief, but there's no publicly available information or actionable information that we've been able to figure out and that residents themselves can access. So to answer your question, I think we have about 6 or so programs guides that will be flowing onto Access NYC over the next quarter, and also potentially into the screening API itself. I think that's like at minimum. And then through our network in the Mayor's Office of Operations, we are paying very close attention to just anything that's emerging into this like broad lens of equity and relief, and naturally starting to look outside of just social services per se. Given all the confusion and complexity around vaccination, we are in the process of developing program guide information on vaccinations that can just hopefully streamline all the different levels of government that are potential resources, and at least how can you make sense of all your different options in the format of how we like try to streamline information into like a plain language guide that's actionable. That's how we're thinking about it so far. I don't know if that totally answered your question.
For sure. Listen, I could ask you questions for like an hour, so I don't want to. If other people have stuff, they should go for it. If not, I got a few more in the. Okay. Has there been any thinking around like once you get this information from people, like collecting their info and then sending them alerts about changing stuff, or around like connecting it to the NYC ID system, things like that, and being more proactive and being like a proactive.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're always looking at opportunities on how can we feasibly connect more directly with services, because technology and information is a relatively simple part of the bigger picture when you go from just understanding what's available and making sense of it to actually going through the service itself, whatever application. Once you're already a client, you're dealing with renewals and public assistance. At that moment, we don't really have too many feasible ways to integrate, say, with other agencies like that are delivering services. It's something that we're always interested in exploring how we can do that. But at least in terms of the current team that's working on Access, we've been able to dedicate resources towards the specific problem of awareness and simplification. And I think it's an ongoing question of how can this better connect to things that are outside of just the website that we manage that doesn't deliver any of these services that you've mentioned.
And can you describe a bit your information collection process from the services?
Yeah, in terms of that whole process of bringing to light a program guide for a new government service or an existing government service, what we'll typically do is we'll do research. So for example, with vaccination efforts that are happening at different levels of government, our team will take the initiative just drafting information in the format of a program guide, assuming that it sort of answers a lot of questions around our considerations, like is it available to New York City residents writ large, regardless of geography? We think about that because the scope of the site is really serving NYC residents regardless of the specific zip code. We think about the duration of something, like is it gonna potentially last through at least the current mayoral administration or even the next year? If something is only gonna be available for, for example, it's like 3 weeks or something like that, and not be potentially repeated, we might not create a program guide around it, but we'll work to support awareness of that specific program. We'll also think about the different touch points of government. So, for example, there's like health insurance assistance, which is managed by New York State. But at the New York City level, there's all these different initiatives to help get people enrolled in healthcare, like NYC Get Covered, which has a street team that actually does direct client work in helping with that. So we'll think about like lots of considerations and questions around this, and think about how does this fit together? How can we work with different administrators of these programs to put together something that's like comprehensive and still actionable for a New York City resident, to ensure that, we've got accurate, authoritative information while we strive to really simplify things from the perspective of just making things actionable. And so typically a lot of it is us doing research and coordinating with the larger mayor's office of operations to identify programs, and then just having conversations with different government entities that are aware of us and are interested in engaging with us.
So I guess it's fair to say that it's kind of a bespoke anthropological style research process where you're building these program guides, and then like the data that comes from that is what is powering the data in the app. Like there's not an interface for them to be updating their information or like uploading like basics.
There is an interface for our liaisons who are fact checkers and authoritative, arbiters of truth on like eligibility policy. We use gathered content as this editorial workflow tool. So we're not mailing things back and forth with different versions. We're all working from this same set of information. We're able to have conversations this way. We're able to raise questions without sending, version 10 of whatever timestamped Word document file. So that's how we handle that collaboration piece, assuming that our liaison in whatever level of government doesn't have this cloud service blocked.
And so you're doing the DMN, like the decision-making notation work, like through these interviews. Like these agencies aren't doing their own. They're not making their own like D rules notation or whatever.
I'm not sure to speak to the specifics of like a DMM process, but when we're engaging with the agencies, and in many cases, we are going to agencies to support awareness of their programs and benefits and services. They very well may have all sorts of different decision-making criteria around if they want to engage with us or not, or what sorts of considerations that they have around supporting information on our site as well. But our position, again, is there's no wrong door to getting information. We have a site that it's fairly like well trafficked, has good SEO. We're going to do the work to simplify information. We're going to do the work to localize this information, and we can, through hosting information on our site, we can bring awareness of these services potentially to like a greater audience. And so that's the sort of value or proposition that we provide, at least when we engage with different levels of government stakeholders who really are the business and service owners of whatever program it is. So there's a bit of negotiation. I don't know if there's a clear set of yes, no, if then. But.
Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I could continue having this conversation, for like another hour, but I won't do that right now. All right. Any other questions or ideas or thoughts that have come up from folks in attendance? All right. So thank you all for joining us this Thursday morning. I'll give everyone about 8 minutes of their life back before lunch or the next session they might be joining. And I'll be emailing out these slides, collecting information from folks who won the scavenger quiz prizes and are really contributed to today's workshop. And we're definitely interested in continuing conversations. If you have ideas or questions around this, or ways that you think you might use this, or ways that you think it might be able to be used. So thanks for coming out to today's session, and enjoy the rest of Open Data Week.